I think there's a lot of truth to successful people do what unsuccessful people were not willing to do. You had to launch quicker, and what you were going to do is you were going to sacrifice some perfection for speed. And in the startup world, that was always a trade-off that you should and be making, because if you're not moving that fast, your competitors will be that fast, and they're capturing market share away from you. And even in small business, it's better to launch something that might not be perfect, see if people like it, and if they like it, perfect it. Become an entrepreneur is to just be an entrepreneur. Like, there's no amount of school and studying that teaches you how to be a founder. You just have to do it, and you learn very, very quickly.
Hi, if I could just have 45 seconds of your time for 2 quick points before we begin this episode. The first is thank you. Thank you for listening or watching this episode of The Leadership Standard. It means the world to us. We have a passion for what we're doing here. And the second thing is, if you haven't already, we'd ask you to subscribe so we can continue to bring the most influential, relevant, and inspiring leaders in the world of small to medium-sized business across Canada and the world. Thank you. Hi, I'm Jamie Mason Cohen, your host for The Leadership Standard. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Michele Romanow, a dragon on Dragon's Den. Michele is a venture capitalist, a tech entrepreneur, and has sold 4 companies by the time she was 35 years old. She is the co-founder of Clearco, which has reinvented the way small businesses and e-commerce gain capital. I want you to really pay attention to the 70% factor, which she talks about. It's her way of overcoming perfectionism, and that's helped her as a leader and a founder. I also found her honest answers about failure, about rejection, about the things that are often not talked about in the small to medium-sized business world and entrepreneurship are addressed directly. Without further ado, my interview with Michele Romanow. Michele, thanks so much for being our guest today on The Leadership Standard.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here.
People know you as this public figure on Dragon's Den, as the co-founder of Clearco. I'd like to get there, but I think what would be really beneficial is to take a step back for some context about how you got to this place. So can we start off in your childhood? And my first question is, what did you learn from your parents about hard work and success, specifically the phrase, and I quote, being hands-on, not hands-in?
You know, I think I had a really wonderful childhood. I had 2 parents that loved me a ton, and I was one of 4 kids. I was the oldest. And I think there was a couple of very key things that they did for me. I think they let my learning expand at my speed. And so they were constantly pushing me to do new things and better things. I remember in grade 6, it was like, okay, and now we read The Economist. And I was like, no kid reads The Economist. And I was, no, you should read it. And you can highlight the things you don't understand, and we'll talk about them at dinner. We played a lot of what we called parlor games, where we'd ask everyone one question at dinner, and then you had to answer it. And it could be as fun as, what would your secret superpower be? Or if you were in charge of fixing Canada, what are the 3 things you'd do tomorrow? And I think that really spurred a lot of really intelligent thinking and curiosity from a very young age. And then, my dad grew up in a 2-bedroom farmhouse without a bathroom in northern Saskatchewan. My mom was a Slovak immigrant, came to Canada when she was 13 years old. And I think at the end of the day, my parents were just really hardworking people. And I was born in Calgary, spent 6 years of my childhood in Regina, and I just grew up with a lot of people who were really down to earth and worked really hard. I think when you're around people that are farmers all the time, everyone understands, if you don't wake up every single morning at 6 a.m., you lose the animals or you lose the crops. And I think that gave me a lot of perspective on how to do things. And I get asked today, sometimes I'm like, oh my, they're like, you're so down to earth. And I'm like, I don't think I ever left Earth, right? I think in my life, I always think of, there could be 2 different turns, and my whole life could have unfolded, so differently. And I think it's the perspective of who you grew up around, and appreciating that.
One thing I read about you was that philosophy, and that your parents gave you, you could say, mantras or philosophies that you've carried forth to this day that helped you
Yeah.
become who you are. One of them was hands on, not hands in.
Yeah.
What were those statements, or what were those tangible ideas that you've carried forth?
Yeah, I think that one specifically is like, get messy, figure it out yourself, be scrappy. Like, there was this huge I think my dad had 3 girls and then a boy, and the boy was 9 years after me. So he kind of, I think, treated me as the firstborn daughter, as kind of the firstborn son. I grew up in an environment where, like, I got to do everything. I mean, we changed the tires. I know how to change tires on a car. I know how to fill up tire pressure. I knew how to check the oil. Like, it was never a question of, oh, these are things that boys did and these are things that girls did. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence in my ability to learn things, confidence to get my hands dirty in doing things. And that has served me so well in my career. I mean, I think that most people who haven't been CEOs don't understand that, like, CEO stands for, like, Chief Everything Officer. At the end of the day, it all rolls up to you, especially if you're a small business owner. And I have had to do things that are remarkably unglamorous, throughout my whole career, beyond even when I had a public profile. Right before we had Groupon visiting our offices, I mean, this was going to be an epic deal if we could sell our tech company at 28 years old to, like, a large publicly traded American tech giant at the time. And I remember like, toilets were clogged, and I was like, "Okay, well, like, I have to solve this because this is we can't have our buyers show up and have them not be able to go to the washroom when it's 11 o'clock at night." And so, there I was figuring out how to get these toilets to work again. And I think there's a lot of truth to successful people do what unsuccessful people were not willing to do. And, just that ability to be hands-on, be willing to be scrappy, get your hands dirty has been so important. I think one of the other things my dad taught me was this idea that you should always, like, question and not really believe in stupid rules. And I mean, you have to do this within reason, obviously, or else you're gonna have a much different problem on your hands. But I remember, my dad was lucky enough to go into, to Air Cadets as a kid, and so he was a pilot, and we would go on airplanes. I remember my first airplane, I was in grade 2, and then, at when the plane is going down, they always say, "Okay, put your tray table up." And my dad would always do work on the plane, and so he had all these, like, papers out and was, marking things up. And then the flight attendant would walk in, like, "Oh, you have to put your tray table up." And every time he would put his tray table up, and then she'd walk away and she'd put his tray table back down and keep working. And I was like, "Dad, you can't do that." And he would just look at me and say, "Michelle, I'm a pilot. If this plane goes down, this tray table is not gonna make a shred of difference. And you don't have to believe in stupid rules." And obviously, he was not gonna get into a fight with, the airline over this if they asked again and again. But there was this constant push to be like, "Why is this a rule? Is this a real rule? Should this be reexamined?" And that, I think, is one of the mindsets that allows you to reexamine an entire industry.
And moving forward on that point, you mentioned in your excellent Audible series, which I could not stop listening to, both the content and the delivery. It
Yeah.
was a 7-part series. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend you check it out. In that series, you talked about being a perfectionist. And I don't know if that was a rule that you had told yourself or that you had absorbed when you were younger, that you had to be perfect. And then when you got a little bit older in your journey, you shifted and you changed your mind on that internal rule. Can you talk about a little bit about the time you were a perfectionist and the moment you decided, or maybe there's not a moment, there were moments, or there's
Yeah.
a specific instance where you thought, I'm no longer going to become a perfectionist because it's no longer serving me?
Yeah. So let's start with how I got to this perfection point. I think it's a little bit more of a female trait. I think I was able to do really well in school, and I had a huge desire. Like, I remember coming home from grade 7 and I was like, I want to write the best book report, not in the class this year. I want to write the best book report that this teacher has ever seen in her career. Like, what possessed me to like think about that? I don't know. I think at that point some of this is just genetic, right? Like you just my parents were amazing and they pushed me and they had very high standards, but I had an enormous amount of drive as a kid and I had an enormous amount of drive to be very good at things. And I played piano and I did all sorts of extracurricular activities. And so that really fostered things. And then I remember moving schools in grade 7 and I had gone this is a really important dynamic that I don't think people pay enough attention to with kids. So when I had left my old Regina school, I was one of 3 friends and I was the dumbest friend. One of the girls was Asian, played piano. She had started 5 years earlier than I did. She was amazing. She became a doctor. My other friend, could read a book with 500 pages. I mean, we're in like grade 5 or something, and she would just crush this whole book. And I just knew that of the 3 of them, I was the dumbest friend. And so, your whole world order is 3 people. And so you're at the bottom of that stack. And I remember moving schools, and I moved to this Calgary school, and I was so conscientious of how I was going to do and what my grades were going to be. And then I remember getting my first report card, and my teacher comes up and she goes, "You have the highest average in the whole class." And I was like, "That's impossible. I'm not that smart because I'm the dumbest of 3 friends." And it was a huge turning point for me because I realized if I worked hard, I could be really good at something. And I think then school, unfortunately, fosters and rewards perfectionism, right? It's literally a system where 100 is better than 90 is better than 80%. And so obviously it was rewarded through the whole educational system with scholarships and all sorts of things for getting very high marks. I think the perfection system works well in some careers, and it certainly works well in things like, research, where most of our big scientific discoveries were a result of a lot of trial and error. And so how did I go from being kind of a perfectionist student into learning that that wasn't the way? I think it was some of my startup education. It was realizing that you had to launch quicker. And what you were going to do is you were going to sacrifice some perfection for speed. And in the startup world, that was always a trade off that you should and be making. Because if you're not moving that fast, your competitor is moving that fast and they're capturing market share away from you. And even in small business, it's better to launch something that might not be perfect, see if people like it, and if they like it, perfect it, versus taking all this time to make things perfect. And so I talk a lot about how I had to unlearn my habit of perfection, how I had to be okay with, if I was going to be a CEO and pick up my phone 30 minutes later and have, 25 messages of people that needed me uniquely to respond, that there was going to be typos and it was going to be quick decision making. And some of this idea that you should be making reversible decisions very fast and irreversible decisions very slow.
And that became the 70% factor.
And that became the 70% factor. And I talk to a lot of other founders about how they figure this out in their journey. And because most people don't know, unless you've been a founder, how much failure there is before you get to success. Like it's an enormous amount of it. It's 80% of the time you are failing.
You said that for every 100 no's, you might get a yes.
Yeah, that's about right. And that when you fundraise, that's about the right number, is you have to prepare yourself for an actual like 99 no's. Most people are not prepared for that. And these are very sophisticated no's from very smart people. And so just being able to endure that, being able to take some of that advice, being able to pivot and grow your business, it's just a lot.
I used to work for Lorne Michaels at SNL, and he said the show was not ready because it's finished. The show's ready because it's 11:30 on Saturday night. So
Yeah.
I really related to this speed over perfection at
Yeah.
different industries, whether it's tech or startup or it's a live show every week.
Yeah. For sure. I couldn't agree more. There's a deadline. I mean, journalists know this too, right? Like it's got to go out, and there's that same pressure in, the social media calendar day. It's just got to go out. And so I think that also just forces you, timelines force you to be better. One of my favorite lines is work expands or contracts given the amount of time you have for it.
Yeah. So my follow up on that before we move into just brief examples of each of the case studies of your life, your entrepreneurial life, is what's one experiment, Michele, you challenge small to medium sized business owners, CEOs, and key executives to run this week to practice fast enough instead of being perfect?
I mean, try 4 things this week. Literally just try 4 things. You're like, "I have a product I wanna try, I have a pricing strategy I wanna try, and I need to fire a person." Those are probably, like, the biggest ones to do. Every single one of us has a person on our team that's dragging everyone down, and it's not the right fit, and it's really scary, and we always drag our feet for too long. There's always a new product that you can try, or you can ask your customers if they wanna try. And pricing is a remarkable lever in most businesses, and most people are really scared to change something, and, everyone's gonna complain, but if they don't stop buying, that means they're okay with it. So, that would be what I would challenge you to do. I would also just challenge you. I think this is constantly a thing for me. I was actually showing, you my handwriting. I constantly force myself to sit down with just a pen and a piece of paper, and I'm like, "If I only do 3 things today, what are the 3 things that matter? Just what are the 3 things that matter?" And that is remarkable in terms of, we do a lot of things that are like getting back to people and like little tasks. There's really 3 things that probably move the needle on your business. And if you focus on doing those, I mean, it's going to have way more leverage than all of your little tasks.
Yeah. And I like how you mentioned when I was reading, put your strategy on a post-it or just keep it to the bare minimum. And that made me feel good. That validated my overwhelm. Michele said, just keep my strategy on a post-it. Why is that?
Well, because we get distracted with so many things, right? Our phones are work devices, but they're giant distraction devices. There's just so much that happens. There are just a couple things and a couple people that will change the lever. You make one great hire that might change the course of your entire business. You close one big partnership that might change the course of your entire big business. You secure one big client, like following up on the things that matter and not focusing on what doesn't matter. And here's the remarkable thing. If you just start your day with doing the 3 hardest things, the rest, just the momentum just takes over. And so I love the strategy on a post-it. We're just doing one thing. And again, you should have these strong beliefs that are loosely held. So, here's your posted strategy today, but I can still be challenged. If that's not working, I'm happy to change it again. But I do have conviction that we are trying this today, because if you have a bunch of weak conviction points, you'll actually never figure out what works anyways.
Even writing it down, it's so underrated. And I love how you're like this, tech entrepreneur of such status, and you're advocating for writing things down. Because when we write
Oh,
things
yeah.
down, we absorb it 30% more than if we even type or text.
I didn't know that. But yes, I love lists. I love structure. I can visually remember what I wrote on lists, and I'm reorganizing notes somehow, especially on to-do lists. Like, I end the day, I have a piece of paper on what I need to do the next day. Like, that is how you get things done. You do not get things done, or at least I cannot get things done by just randomly sitting out on my computer. I mean, I have 140 tabs open right now. Like, if I just go into that mess of every project I have been thinking about, it's not gonna end well for me.
So we started with your background, and we are
Mm,
structuring this with a little bit of improv moving to the future. So could we do a little bit of a Michele entrepreneurial journey speed round and go through several of your entrepreneurial journeys really quickly when I name each one of them?
of course.
Let's start at the tea room, which was your first big one at about 22. You started the tea room at Queen's.
Yeah, so I studied engineering because my parents told me I could study anything as long as it was engineering. Quickly figured out I was gonna be much better at building businesses versus bridges. Was an environmentalist and really thought, "Why don't you take a simple business like coffee and see if you can make it zero waste?" And took 2 years and opened the tea room on the Queen's campus, which was a little coffee shop where everything was zero waste, and it's still around and run by students today, which I think is such a cool story nearly 17 years later. So that was my first business. That was my first time hiring people. That was my first time managing people. And you learn a lot. And even some of the challenges I had at Clearco, I could relate back to some of the challenges I had at the tea room in the early days. So, the best way to become an entrepreneur is to just be an entrepreneur. Like there's no amount of school and studying that teaches you how to be a founder. You just have to do it and you learn very, very quickly.
And then you went into the caviar business at Evandale.
Yeah.
And you talk about how that happened, where you're finding yourself in New Brunswick and opening up a fishery with no prior background in the caviar business or the sturgeon business, from what I read.
Yeah. So as I was trying to raise money for the tea room, I figured out that there were these business plan competitions and you could enter a pitch competition. If you won like $20,000, which was a lot of money to open a business. Then I found my partner, Anatoly, who remained my partner for the next 20 years. And we decided we were going to come up with a business plan and brainstormed hundreds of ideas until coming up with pursuing caviar and fish farming, which was the craziest thing, a couple of 20-year-olds could have come up with. But we had really good reason. Worldwide supply of caviar was down by 98% because the world had overfished the Caspian Sea. And when we cold called restaurants, they couldn't find it products. So we're like, I think we have a captive market. So we won some business plan competitions, which was great. We had just a fraction of the money that we needed. And so our solution was to get scrappy. We had figured out that there was a wild supply of sturgeon that hadn't been caught for a number of different years in New Brunswick. So, we literally drove our car all the way out to St. John and started building a fishery from scratch, which is everything it sounds like: boats, fishermen, my hands knee deep in fish, the whole 9 yards.
And what was the biggest takeaway from that experience for you?
Well, that was really, I think, what got rid of most of my perfectionism, Jane, because, we had won, I don't know, $120,000 at pitch competitions. Like our pitch was near perfect. It was actually still at Western when you watch how to do a pitch. They would show a video for like 15 years of me pitching this caviar business, which was so cool. I get like people come up to me and like, I think at Western, I like watched you pitch. And so the caviar business never, got to scale because, 4 months into launching, we had the huge recession in 2008. And we were selling the world's most unnecessary luxury products at a time when, markets were crashing. And so when businesses fail, you have a remarkable amount of time to think. And the number one takeaway I took from this was that everything we wrote in a business plan that won us this pitch plan competition money didn't happen. And everything I learned about running this business happened the day I got to New Brunswick. And so this really necessitated this whole idea of, your entire strategy should be on a Post-it, and then you should just start doing. And it is through execution and iteration that you will get a great innovation. It is not through more brainstorming and not through more perfection and not through more perfect, business plans and business models.
And Michele, from there, you co-founded Bitopia.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how that came about?
Yeah. So the recession got so bad, I ended up taking a job at a major retailer as the director of strategy. I somehow had a friend that I went to business school with that convinced these guys I should come in at like 8 levels above entry level, which was wild. I was working for Sears, which at the time was Canada's largest retailer and certainly largest e-commerce retailer because it was so small. And at the time, the way we thought of e-commerce was, Sears was 300 stores. One of those stores was the e-commerce store effectively. So we're talking like 1% to 2% of retail sales. But I remember just using that opportunity to learn. I tried to learn everything about retail. I tried to learn everything about e-commerce. And I remember seeing this daily deal space start to blow up in the US. I got back together with the same 2 guys that we had started the caviar business with. And we said, okay, we got to launch a daily deal site. But instead of a business plan, we got a Post-it. And the Post-it said, we're going to use overseas software developers because we just don't have the money left to pay Canadians. The second part of our business plan was that we would launch a trade show. And the third part of our business plan is that we would have someone famous tweet for us. And that was a remarkable shift in terms of how we started the company. I would have never guessed from there that we would have become one of the fastest growing companies in Canada. we did remarkably well. And the really cool part of the story is before we sold the company, they were like, why is the legal name of Bitopia still Avondale Caviar Inc.? And it was because it was started off the last $15,000 that was left in our Avondale Caviar bank account.
Wow. And was it Bitopia that got the attention of Dragon's Den?
So that was a little later. We did a lot of iterations at Bitopia of businesses that didn't work and early tech businesses. And, we built a competitor to MindBody. We built a competitor to Uber Eats. We tried all of those different spaces until finally we started to build an early AI app called SnapSaves. We probably sold it way too early to Groupon in 2014. I, at 28 years old, had gone from 7 years into my career, finally having an exit. And so it just felt like everything was worth it. And that got the attention of Dragon's Den. They called our customer support line asking if I would want to audition. I fully thought they had the wrong person, but I figured, you don't say no to good luck. And, from there, rest is history.
What was going through your mind, Michele, the first time you stepped on the set of Dragon's Den as a dragon?
Well, you have to imagine what the auditions are like. So the audition is actually they mock up a show and they have like 9 cameras on you. So there's 5 people that are auditioning to be a dragon. And then there's a real pitcher entrepreneur that comes in for the show. So you sit there and it's me and it's, I think, 4 or 5 other men. And everyone just wants to like talk. So everyone's talking over each other. Everyone's interrupting each other. Like it is really, really intense. And I remember in my first audition, I was like, okay, I definitely didn't get the role because I didn't really say much. And, this really nice junior producer at the time, I got into Adam Avrashi, who I still have an amazing relationship with, was like, look, we might do like a web series. And so maybe you can like come for that. And I just remember thinking like, that's what they tell the losers. Then Adam called me back and he said, look, we're doing this show called Next Gen Den, and it's 3 dragons. They're smaller deals. They're just tech deals. And, we want you to audition for that. So then I came for my second audition. And in that, there was 2 panels of 3 pitches each. And I could tell that there was an A panel with stronger people and there was a B panel that I was on with the weaker people. So I was like, again, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really difficult. So I do the audition and they send me the tape. And as soon as you see yourself on camera for the first time, I mean, you're on SNL, like, this, you can correct really fast. Cause you're like, oh, why did my eyebrows do this? Why am I like pursing my lip really strange as like people are talking to me? Oh, I remember seeing like 5 minutes of something and that was cut down to 30 seconds. Here are the 30 seconds that mattered. And so you can get very, very good at self-correcting once you see yourself. And so I know people are like, oh, I don't want to watch myself. I don't want to listen to myself. If you want to get good, it is essential. And trust me, your voice is only annoying for the first 20 seconds. And then you really tune into the fact that it's okay. That made a huge difference. And so the Next Gen Den show went well. And then I got the call that I was going to go on the real show. So nothing is easy. There's a lot of failure. I think at any point in that, I could have been, fully rejected. And I've now done 11 seasons of the show. I absolutely love it. It's been a huge part of my life. My Dragon's Den portfolio companies that Anatoly and I have invested in are some of, our most exciting experiences. And so I love it.
What are some of the mistakes that participants on Dragon's Den make?
There's the obvious ones where you just don't know your numbers. You're not incredibly well prepared. You don't understand that there's a give and take where you need to be a strong founder and understand your business, but you also be willing to be coachable and take advice. There's a real push and pull there that needs to work. And, sometimes people just don't understand what they're presenting to an investor. And you just have to put yourself in the other person's shoes, right? Saying, I want your money. The market is really small. This can probably grow at 30% a year. I mean, guys, that's a great business for the founder. That's a terrible business for an investor, right? Um, just putting your money in the S&P pays more, and startups are like 100 times riskier than, a basket of equities. So I think sometimes there's a real confusion about what a founder needs and what is good for an investor. And it has to be win-win on both sides for that to work. And frankly, venture capital became way too skewed in one ways. I mean, it was one of the problems where companies would only be aiming for billion-dollar outcomes because, venture portfolios had to support that every company had the potential to be a billion-dollar outcome. Where, I think there's nothing wrong with building, $50 million companies and $100 million companies. But those deals need to just be structured a little bit different so an investor is getting their capital back a little bit along the way as the business is growing, and you don't need to wait for these massive, exit outcomes to get something done.
Clearco changed the way founders get capital. What's one story that captures the excitement and pressure that you faced at Clearco in building it at scale?
Oh my goodness. I mean, look, I think there is, how I had to operate at Clearco, which was like everything had to be fast. Decisions had to be fast. We had to make a lot of hiring in a short period of time. I, remember the day where I stepped down as CEO and I had like never gotten into an Uber slowly. Like it was like bags are banging. I was like, we have to go. Like everything was like go, go, go. My days were backed, one half an hour meeting after the other. I remember telling my team, I'm really sorry I have to eat on these calls because I literally would book every single moment of my day was just working. And that I don't think there is another way. I don't think it's nice when people lie to you and they tell you that you can have all this balance and build a business. I think with a lifestyle business, that's totally possible. With a venture-backed and scale business, it is your job to build the market leader and to build the category creator. And that's what we did. We've given out more than $5 billion to 10,000 different companies in 13 countries around the world. The scale of that is absolutely remarkable when you consider, some of the biggest venture firms, they're billion-dollar firms, that capital gets deployed over 7 years. So this was a totally different scale of what we were doing and the value prop that we were offering to entrepreneurs, which is, you don't need to pitch us. You can plug in your accounts, we can look at your data, and we can provide you the capital to grow. And instead of taking a piece of your company that we will own forever, we want effectively a rev share until our capital is paid back. And I think, how we transformed that business and that market, the fact that there's many other billion-dollar players that have come in. This is now a model that exists internationally around the world to the enormous benefit of founders. I feel just so proud of what we have built. And, the 100-person team that's there today that is still, growing a very steady business right now.
If entrepreneurs or future entrepreneurs and founders want to learn more about how they could approach Clearco, where would they go?
Yeah, just go to clear.co, the website, and, feel free to send me a direct message if you have more questions about that. But we serve e-commerce businesses. So that's probably the biggest thing is that a lot of people come in from different places. You have to have an online component for us to be able to give you access to capital.
Michele, I asked our community 4 questions. Here's one particular question that they asked. What's 1 or 2 critical methods or habits that you can attribute to your success?
The first habit is I have a very systematic way of dealing with failure. I have to deal with a lot of failure that I've had personally and that I've had professionally and that I've had building businesses. And there is a process where you have to sit down, you have to write down everything that you have learned. And you then have to take those learnings and cement them in your mind. And then you have to stop thinking about what has failed and immediately start testing and trying the new thing. Because the mistake that most people make is they never learn from their mistakes. So they're constantly on the same treadmill of making those mistakes, which is really bad. Or they're dwelling in the old mistake and they never want to try something new. So it has to be this combination of sitting down quietly in a room without a cell phone, without any other distraction, of being like, what did I learn? And then a combination of let's move on and just grow and build the next thing. That's, I think, one really important habit. The next important habit of mine is, I don't know, handwriting, really. Like I make a lot of lists. I prioritize ruthlessly. And I spend a lot of time thinking about, am I doing the right things versus am I doing all the things? I think that maybe the third habit is, everyone has a different version of health, and there's a biohacker that tells you you need to do 1,000 things. I think at the end of the day, you do need to care about your body, and you need to exercise, you need to get some sleep, you need to get outside on your bare feet, and need to get some sunshine. And if you can just manage to do some of those with some level of priority in your life, I think your whole existence changes, especially as we age, especially as there's a lot of chemicals in everything we consume. Just having some focus on that, I think makes a really big difference.
If you could talk to the younger Michelle, the one who's chasing 100% perfect, what would you say to her?
Well, I would certainly tell her, Michelle, get out of your perfection mode and get into execution mode, because there is no amount of planning that will make you successful. You just have to go. And then I would say, every once in a while, Michelle, take a second and enjoy the ride, because this goes really fast as well. And, it felt so miserable at some points, but then there was so many joyful points. I just wish I would have enjoyed a couple more of them in that moment, and just, taking a step back. And I never thought my life would have turned out like this. I think, growing up in Regina, if I had had a tiny company with 2 employees, I would have thought I had made all my goals work. And so a lot of this has exceeded my wildest expectations. And so taking a second to appreciate that, I think, always matters.
Michelle, what excites you the most about the future of entrepreneurship? And what's the one message you want to share with the next generation of entrepreneurs and founders?
Entrepreneurs build the world that we want to live in, and they are far more effective than governments. They are far more effective than any other structure that we figured out. If you want to change something in the world, please be an entrepreneur. It won't be easy, but it will be the fastest way to changing the way society does something, because there are a lot of drawbacks with capitalism. But the one thing that always exists is that when you invent something better, people have to respond. And so every small business owner has the opportunity to do that. Every single business has the opportunity to change how things are done. And I can't imagine a better place. And so everyone's, going to say that entrepreneurship is broken and, this is a tough job. There's a reason to quit. That's a very legitimate reason every single week. I describe being an entrepreneur as every week you get punched in the face twice and you have absolutely no idea what that's going to come from, how it's going to be, but it is going to be your job to drop whatever was on your list that day and deal with that. And that's just part of the job. And it's really hard. I mean, you look at the e-commerce entrepreneur in the last year, it's like, okay, there has been, constant postal shutdowns. There has been an entire tariff issue. There has been an entire supply chain issue that people have to go around. I mean, that's a lot. Most people wouldn't want to quit because it doesn't feel fair. But this is the world. It's your job to respond. And the good companies figure out a way. And when you just have that growth mindset, I will get stronger. This is an excuse to make my company stronger. With everything that you do, it makes a huge difference.
We've talked about if entrepreneurs and small business owners want to learn more about your work at Clearco, where to go. Are there any other places that you'd like our audience to check out when it comes to your recent or current projects?
Yes. So I'm pretty active on Instagram. So check me out there. I read my own direct messages. So if you have something cool that you want to show me, feel free to reach out. I'm active on LinkedIn as well. So I look at that platform quite a bit, and hope you can find me there.
Michele Romanow, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the Leadership Standard. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It was great to be here, Jamie.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Leadership Standard. If you want to hear more episodes or see more episodes like this one with the world's leading thinkers in leadership and business, like Marshall Goldsmith, Don Yeager, Seth Godin, Daniel Pink, Dory Clark, and more, then go to the Leadership Standard. You'll see the links below. Additionally, if you are a small to medium-sized business owner, a key executive across Canada, and you want to be part of an influential group of some of the leading business thinkers in the country, look at techcanada.com, tec-canada.com, to help your company grow, to help you develop the skills you need as a leader, and to be part of a group of like-minded people in a confidential space where you get together every month to see how you can develop your skills to become the leader that you know that you can be and take your leadership skills to the next level. Thank you.